So Jason from the Jason's Lab YouTube channel sent me the Grandstream GWN7660 Wi-Fi 6 access point a year and a half or so ago. And because I needed to test some mini PCs which had Wi-Fi 6 capabilities, and I didn't have any Wi-Fi 6 access points. I still have Wi-Fi 5, Unify access points. So that was very helpful for some testing that I needed to do. But it was my first introduction to Grandstream products. And I liked the fact that I can control this with a web interface, or a self-hosted controller, or a cloud controller, or if you have another access point from Grandstream, you can control it from there as well. And that's really nice to have that flexibility. So I decided since then to buy two 48-port network switches, which have 10 gig interfaces. So I've been enjoying using those network switches. I reached out to Grandstream to see if they would send me a couple other products to try out. And I don't normally reach out to vendors too often because usually they get several requests coming in, just people see my stuff on YouTube. But I decided, since I like Grandstream products enough, that I thought I'd try to see if they would have some stuff available to demonstrate. So a couple of the products that Grandstream sent me were newer. This is the Grandstream GWN7664E, and it's a little bit bigger than this other Wi-Fi 6 access point. You can see how it's a little bit bigger. I'm kind of blocking the light right a little bit, but so it's a little bit bigger, it's heavier. So this Wi-Fi access point behind me is a 2x2 Wi-Fi access point, and this is a 4x4. This one, they already had one that's a Wi-Fi 6 4x4, which is a 7664 without the E. And this one seems like it has a little more aggregate bandwidth compared to the other Wi-Fi 6 model that they have. So I don't have that one to compare the speed differences, but this can handle probably more clients with a little extra bandwidth. And you can tell on the bottom of this device, it has two 2.5 gig Ethernet interfaces. This is only a Wi-Fi 6 and not a 6E device. So it's only a dual band, not a tri-band device. But the aggregate throughput can still exceed 1 gigabit, but these are 2.5 gigabit Ethernet interfaces. Next up is the Grandstream GWN7811P. As you can see here, it's kind of hard to see in the video because it's shiny and glossy and reflective, so I have my light over here. But this has 1 gigabit Ethernet interfaces that are PoE powered, and two 10 gigabit SFP plus interfaces here. So you got a little bit of 10 gig connections. It's labeled as a layer 3 managed network switch and not layer 2 like my 48-port switches. But my 48-port switches do support static routes. It has a little bit of layer 3 functionality. Some vendors call that layer 2 plus, but it has a little bit of those kinds of features. But this has OSPF, so you can do dynamic routing with it. So it has a little bit more layer 3 functionality than some of the other switches. And this has a console port just like most of these types of switches that are made for businesses. And it just has on the back, just power cord and just a grounding screw. Last but not least is the device I'm the most excited of trying out, and it's their new convergence series models. It's the GCC6010. They have a 6011, which has more ports on it, and a 6010W, which has wireless built-in capabilities. But I just have the 6010, which does not have wireless, which for the most part, if you're buying separate access points, this will be great for home use or small business. So here's the GCC6010. It has 5 1 gigabit Ethernet interfaces. It has 2 SFP interfaces, but it says they're rated for 2.5 gigabit. So you could use these as your internal networks or a WAN connection, which up to 2.5 gigabits. So if you have like 2 gigabit fiber or something like that, you could use one of these interfaces. So it's great that this can go a little bit beyond 1 gigabit. But these devices, I'm hoping they'll have some of which they're a little higher powered in the future, but this is their first product line with this. And the nice thing about this is it's not only a router and a basic firewall, but it has additional security features on it with like a next generation firewall software. You can do intrusion detection, malware detection, botnet detection, virus scanning, and it does all those sorts of denial of service protections and those sorts of things. All those features are in this device. And not only that, if you are running a business, you can do voice over IP with this as well. So you don't need to buy a separate box to manage some of your voice over IP devices. So you can do all those things with this. I'm not going to talk about the voice over IP stuff too much because most users at home networks aren't going to mess with that too much. And this device can manage, it has a built-in controller to manage all of your other Grandstream hardware switches and APs. So that's great as well. You can manage everything from this box. You don't need to have a separate controller. So you can use this. So this is yet another option to manage your devices, right? So you can do a self-hosted controller, a cloud controller. You can do this device, the convergence devices, and you can also directly access everything through the local web interfaces. So you have like 4 or 5 options here, right? So it's great that you have that flexibility with these devices. That's one reason why I like them and requested to try some more out. So one thing to note about the IDS and IPS and those sorts of protections, if you enable that, this box is rated for 900 megabits, which will almost fully saturate a gigabit Ethernet interface. So if you are expecting it to do a WAN interface up to 2.5 gigabits and you have those things enabled, you're going to reduce your bandwidth to about 1 gigabit. So it's fine if you have up to gigabit internet. And one other thing that's kind of interesting on the back here, you see not only do you have the power cord and a factory reset button, and you have a little cable management hook here. You can run a cable through there, the power cable. You have like a little lock that you can hook in here, and then you have the grounding screw. But the interesting part back here is you have a micro SD slot. So you can store, it's probably maybe for the voice over IP, you can use that as some storage for maybe voicemails or whatever. But on the front, there is a USB 3.0 port that you can connect a USB drive to this box and have a simple file share that you can enable from this box. And maybe you could also potentially use it, I don't know if to store voicemails or whatever. I didn't see what all you can use it for, but I did see you can do a network share with it, which that kind of reminds me of like a consumer grade router where you can connect like an Asus router or something like that. You can connect in a USB drive and have a simple file share. So I'm going to be showing these features in detail. I'm going to be focusing mostly on the features of this, but I'll show you the web interface for the network switch and the wireless access point separately at the end, because there are some additional features that are in those web interfaces that you might not see in the convergence solution, where it's trying to manage all of your devices in one spot. I don't think you can get access to every little minute detail. And most of the time that's fine, but in case you might need something in those web interfaces, you might have to go in and to that specific interface. And one thing that I noticed too, which I'll mention later in the video, is if you need to upgrade the firmware for these devices, you need to log into that device first, go and update the firmware, and then add it to this GCC to manage it, because I noticed sometimes like the firmware on this network switch was too old to be able to import into this to manage it. So I had to update that firmware first, and then I can just import it in with no problem. All right, so let's go look at the web interface and see what all is available. All right, so I'm going to log into the GCC6010 and we'll see what all features are available. I'm kind of just going to do a high level overview, just showing all the features that I think are the most interesting about it, which there's a lot available with this convergence solution, as I mentioned already. So let's get into it and we'll see what we can do with this device. It's a small little device and a lot of features in it. So let's go ahead and take a look. This is a nice clean looking dashboard. The UI for their products are pretty nice. You can see this is the GC6010. It has some stats about this device and memory, CPU, disk usage, all that basic things. But they have these different areas: networking, firewall, network nodes, PBX, and some UC endpoints. They have some PBX functionality we're not going to worry about too much, because for a home network, I'm not really focused on that. But these sections here for the networking, firewall, and network nodes, you'll see they're also available up here at the top. So these are the same features. There's just a shortcut from the dashboard. So let's take a look we'll just look at from the dashboard point of view. First, on the left-hand side, we have the topology. This is similar to Unify, how they have, these types of graphs and charts, and it tells you which interface is connected to and what speeds and all those sorts of things. And you'll notice it doesn't show any clients here by default, but you can view that if you go up to this menu at the top, and you can just enable all these things. And let's see, I don't have any wireless right now, so those won't show up. But see, I have my wired connection here. I'm using a Zima board to manage and administrate this, so you can see all those devices here if I want to see them. So that's pretty cool. You can kind of filter that out if you want to see that. You can zoom in and out like this, and if you have a big network, you'll be able to see a lot more devices. And this goes system settings. We got basic settings, device names, that's those sorts of things. Security settings. Let's see. Yeah, this is just to get into the web access. You can allow it to be accessed on the WAN interface, which is, you might want to do that if it's if this device is internal in your network. You wouldn't necessarily want to do it externally. VPN would be a better way to get to it. And see, SSH you might want to enable access. It's a little bit safer to enable if you're using SSH keys, but then again, you can still use a VPN to get SSH access if you want. And remote access without password, it says when accessing remotely via the GDMS networking. So you might have to go through their app to do this. So I'm not sure how safe this is to enable. It's just an option there for you. And then you can set schedules, like a lot of these devices, set a schedule for when I guess it's operational, on and off. Might be useful for more for a business, or you'd like to shut your network down at night when you're not using it. Those sorts of things when you're not watching it. Yeah, some people might want to be able to do that. This is users for this device. You can get in. Most home users, one account is probably good enough. That's probably all you need. So let's go to email settings. Email settings are important if you're doing, especially if you want to have notifications sent to you from this device, because there's a lot of alerts that you can have sent, which is really neat. I'll show you the types of alerts you can send later. But you basically provide all this information in here, and you can create the template. There's a couple different ones for resetting passwords and alert events and those sort of things like that. SMS settings, you can send SMS text messages, which is pretty neat. If I enable this, you can go and use, I guess, Twilio and Amazon are the two services you can use to send via SMS. So that's an option, probably more important for businesses than a home user. But, the fees for that might be so small for a home user. For Twilio, for example, I went and looked that, it might be interesting to have alerts sent to text message that way, if you so desire. I'm not going to worry about PBX stuff. That's for IP phones. Let's look at, maintenance. Of course, you can upgrade this device with the different firmware versions. You can, have it check and download firmware at boot up, and you can even schedule the upgrades if you want as well from their cloud server here, it looks like. And you can also do a manual upload if you want. As of the time of this video, this is the current version of this GCC6010, so I don't need to update the firmware on this. And you can back up and restore the settings for this device. It's not a bad idea if you have a lot of settings configured on here. Of course, you can factory reset. We're not worried about that. Notification center, you can see all the notifications on this device. Kind of interesting, the time frame on this. It says 2012. So I obviously didn't do this because I just got this device. But this came with this device, and maybe with some test data that got left in there in the logs. And there's various settings you can do in here for the notifications. You can set, it's about this individual device, so you can get host memory usage, disk usage, all those important things you might want to know for temperatures. You can set the thresholds. There's a lot of things you can alert on here. So let's go to this first one, which is going to be the networking tab. And we'll see in here, once it loads, you'll see the speed of your internet usage right now. It's only barely using anything because I'm not really doing much with this one device that I have. Down here you can see there's traffic statistics. This is disabled by default, but I decided to enable it so I can see what it looks like, and it has some deep packet inspection capabilities. You will have to disable some of the network hardware acceleration to be able to do some of this deep packet inspection. Other products are similar in that nature. When you start inspecting and doing things, you can't always accelerate all that stuff because it has to open up and dig into some of these packets. So that's kind of interesting. I'll show you that setting later. But you'll see it. I had my phone connected a little bit, and you can see some sites that it showed up on there, like X and Facebook and speed testing. I've done some speed testing with the AP that I have connected. And you see a network traffic graph, and if there's any alerts happening for your network here, there's none currently. Port info is pretty interesting. Just a quick overview. You can see that this one is a WAN interface that I have connected to the internet, and has a little icon there. It says connected to the internet. So when it detects it, it'll show it. Out of the box, ports 5 and 7 are configured as your two WAN interfaces. You can change which ports are the WAN, so these don't have to be 5 and 7, but that's what they are out of the box. I, of course, plugged in the very first time to plug it into my LAN network to administrate it. I used port 5 because I was like, I don't need to use any of the PoE ports. And of course, that one was the one that was configured as the WAN interface, and I couldn't get into this box. So just keep that in mind. Just plug in the ports 1 through 4. So that's what I'm doing right now. I have my device I'm administrating with on port 1. Port 4, I'm connecting it to the switch that they sent me. So that's what it's all plugged in here. You'll see some basic info about the devices that it's connected to. So you'll see some network traffic statistics down here in real time, and you'll see more information here about the IP address and the network and how long it's been connected. All those basic things. Okay, so let's go to network settings. Look at port configuration. This is very similar to the page that we just were looking at, isn't it? But down here, you'll get to see a little more information about the role of the interface and if it's a gigabit Ethernet versus SFP. And you get to see the speed and duplex options here in the flow control. You'll see what's interesting about the SFP Plus interfaces on this box is they're capable of 2.5 gigabit. And it's kind of interesting that to me that it's not capable of 10 gigabit if it can do 2.5, because usually SFP interfaces only do 1 or 10. But you could get modules that support 2.5 and 5 gigabit as well. Maybe in the future they'll have one with 10 gigabit interfaces. That'll be really awesome, because this is their first crack at doing these convergence devices, I think. So this is really cool stuff here. And down here at the bottom, you can see the PoE configuration. You can set which one has the highest or lowest priorities and anything in between. For the different interfaces, because there's only so much power budget, and it tries to give more priority to certain ports than others. So whichever one needs the most power, you should put that as highest, and so forth. Okay, so if we go to the WAN interface, this is where I think, yeah, you can select if you, want to have the different interfaces enabled or not. I could probably turn off one of the interfaces because I'm not using dual WAN configurations, but it's already configured out of the box for dual WAN configurations. Probably a lot of businesses have a backup connection, so it's good that it comes out of the box that way. Most home users probably won't have that, but it's good that you can do that. You can add a WAN interface up here, and you can select which port that you can do, and there's various informations here, tracking IP address and that sort of thing for knowing if the interface is up or down. That's what this tracking one is. They're using Google for the pinging at interface. You can set up VLAN tags, and you got IPv6 configuration, just usual things that you would want to set up on an interface. I believe you can have up to 3 WAN interfaces on this device. I can't remember if the 6011 can allow more than 3, but this one I believe supports up to 3. That's why I can still add another one if I want 3 WAN connections. All right, so the LAN settings are for all the other ports. This is where you can come in and add new VLANs, because we're already on the VLAN tag, so you can put the ID in and put the name of the VLAN, and you can give the VLAN a destination if you want to route to a certain gateway, a certain WAN interface, it looks like, possibly. So that's pretty cool. All right, so IGMP, there's some IGMP proxy settings and IGMP snooping. So if you want to make use of that for like IP cameras or other multicast traffic, this is where you can enable some of these things that kind of reduce bandwidth consumption on your network. So for the network acceleration, this is what I was talking to you about earlier. If you want to enable traffic statistics, you have to bump it down to firewall acceleration or disable. Because on the full hardware acceleration, you cannot do deep packet inspection, and there are certain features you can't even do with firewall acceleration, like quality of service controls, which I'll show in a little bit. But so you might have to disable all network acceleration. I'm not sure how much this acceleration helps with certain things. I'm sure the firewall acceleration should help with, IDS IPS performance, but I'm not sure how much it affects throughput if you're not using IDS IPS. This hardware acceleration really help a lot, maybe if you have a lot of clients in the network. So this is a setting you might need to come in and tweak depending on what features you want to use on this device. You might have to completely disable it. All right, so let's go down to the VPN section, and you can see that it supports most of the protocols that probably many users would want: IPsec, OpenVPN, and WireGuard. There's some other options that might be a little bit more rare. So let's go to routing. You'll see this supports policy routing, which you can select if you want to do load balancing, or if I go to edit here, this is the default profile here. It's set to load balance, but you can set it up as a failover, which is called backup. So you can set it up as a backup connection, and you can select your WAN interfaces you want to use for that. For those, you need at least 2 or 3, of course, interfaces to do that. And there's some policy route configuration in here. If you go to add, you'll see options to set. You can have certain source groups use certain destinations, and you can determine if you want to use which load balancing profile you want to use, and you can schedule this. So maybe during the daytime you want certain things to be routed certain paths. So that's pretty cool. It has this policy-based routing in here, and of course it has static routes. Since this is like a full router in addition to a bunch of other features, of course it supports static routing. These are the default routes it sets up for the WAN interfaces and the default VLAN. And let's see, traffic management. We'll go to traffic statistics. You can see it has a nice little breakdown of the different apps and what percentage is being used. And there's some basic settings here. This is where you can enable traffic statistics, which already did that ahead of time. And you can use AI recognition to maybe further refine these categories it says here. It might require more CPU and memory resources. Just keep that in mind. All right, quality of service. See, this is where it says firewall acceleration is enabled. It would say hardware acceleration is enabled if you have full hardware acceleration enabled. So it says quality of service doesn't take effect until you disable network acceleration completely. So as you can see here on the bandwidth, you can limit upload or download bandwidth, and each of these classes, I think, allows up to 25% of the bandwidth to be consumed. And if you go in here, you can probably you can set these thresholds. Oh yeah, it looks like it does have 25% for all 4 classes. So they each get 25%. You can change this allocation. The highest, maybe you want to make that 50%, and then give the others even lower percentages. What's interesting is you can go over to this app class page, this tab here. You'll see all of the different categories, application categories, and you can set what class you want all these for the priority. So that's how it knows, like if it categorizes the traffic based on all these categories, that's how it can limit the quality of service controls based on what you have on that general settings page. And you can add some additional class rules possibly if you want to have your own. I don't know. Maybe that gives you the ability to add some of your own. I haven't dug into this very much, but it looks like you can get some nice control over it. And you also have some options for voice over IP if you have that on your network to give it priority. Bandwidth control. The bandwidth limits is interesting because it's, in some ways it's kind of similar to quality of service, but it's less sophisticated. It's just a simple maximum amount of bandwidth. You can specify the kilobits or megabits that you want, or maximum upload or download speeds. And you can even set it on a schedule. So I like that you have this. This doesn't require you to disable any of your hardware acceleration, which is nice. So I think that's great. Intelligent speed limit is, it says whenever this device has like, high traffic CPU load is high, it'll kind of limit some of the traffic. And access controls. So you got safe search here you can enable for these different web browsers. So, if you want to do that, might be useful if you have kids or something, but this does it for the whole entire network, it looks like. So you may not want to enable it for your whole network because I don't see any options to do it for individual networks. External access. So this is interesting. If you want to use dynamic DNS, there's an option here to enable it on this device. But the only bad part is they don't have all of the providers. You're limited to using these ones. These are some of the more common ones. But you can't use something like Cloudflare, because I use Cloudflare as my DNS provider. So there's no option for Cloudflare here. So if I use this as my main network router, I would have to run a service internal on my network. It's not that big a deal. I could just run probably DD client on a container or something on my Proxmox server, right? Port forwarding. This is like your basic port forwarding options you can get here. You can set the protocol and the interface you want it to apply to. The source address, you probably want it to be any, and unless you want to restrict it to specific IP addresses. The interesting part about this is it says source port, because usually source ports from external users are random, but this says it's the service port provided by the router to the WAN. And it says external users can obtain the services by sending requests to this port. I think this is really the port on this WAN interface. And they're calling it source port because that's the source of the port forwarding. It's kind of interesting terminology because really it's not like OPNsense where the destination is going to be like the WAN interface and then you're redirecting it to an internal one. So I think destinations, your internal IP address you're going to forward to. But you have to put the source port to be like 443 or whatever you're using to get into, and then then your destination will be your internal server, internal port. So it's the way they do this is a little bit different. And then we go to the DMZ. This reminds me a lot when I'm gonna click add here. This reminds me a lot of like a consumer grade router where a DMZ is just a single device that you can open up. Basically, all ports are open externally. So I'm not sure. This could be useful if you have another device internally. You want to fully manage everything and you want all the ports to pass through. Most of the time you don't want this to be on the public internet, but maybe you have something internally. This might be something useful to do. So that DMZ option is available. You got UPnP, which if you're doing gaming and that sort of thing, you might want to enable this to allow ports to be opened automatically by the game consoles or whatever. I'm not going over about turn service. And then maintenance, you want to enable SNMP. That's a tongue twister. You can do that there, so you can get the diagnostics on your network for this device, just like any other devices if you want to collect that information. And system diagnostics, it has a lot of features in here to test things out. Like you can do packet captures here, and you can specify the MAC address and IP address. You can send data to an external syslog and do some PoE network diagnostics here. There's various things you can do. Alerts and notifications. You can see some alerts here, and email notifications are also here. You can enable them. We already looked at some of those settings prior. I think if I click on this, it might look like similar to, well, maybe not. But so under alert notification settings, you can see there's upgrade alerts, high temperature. These are the actual alerts you can enable for system and performance alerts here, which might be helpful if you want to know something's bogging down maybe. And then you got some other network alerts for different things that are failing to connect on your network. So that's very helpful. If we go back to alerts and notifications, I can look at the email notification settings. Then I think that's it's kind of similar to the other alerts because you can do upgrade and pairing alerts on online, offline, those types of things. It's almost the same things as what was enabled before, except it has all the descriptions with them. It's kind of, so you have very similar options there for alerts, which is very handy. System settings, if you want to set up certificates on this system, you can do that. Your own custom certificates. File sharing, this is interesting. The GCC6010 has a USB port on it. You can plug a hard drive in there and share the storage on this box as some basic files, basic file server. If you have a Radius server, you can set this device up to connect to a Radius server for authentication. So here's the settings for that. So what I'm going to do, instead of going to the next one with the firewall settings, I'm going to do that last because that's the most exciting to me, I think. I'm going to go over to network nodes, and you can see more information about the types of devices that you can manage from this GCC6010 box. You'll see the overview of the number of access devices, switches, and clients. It's not very interesting because I have one client on here. You can see it down here. You can see the top SSIDs and top access devices. AP management. I have one AP that they sent me, the 7664E, and that is right here. And you can see its IP address and firmware version. All right, so now let's go to Wi-Fi management, and then you'll see you can set up your SSIDs in here. You can go in and create multiple SSIDs. I just set one up on the default network with no associated VLAN, but you can go in here and add. This is how you enable it, this Wi-Fi button, and then you give it a name, and then you can pop in a VLAN in here. I don't have any VLANs added, but you can just click add from here to see what that looks like, and then you can say you want dual band. Access security, you can do WPA2 or 3 or both. There's different options in here. There's a bunch of settings here. WPA shared key, enable captive portal for this SSID. So if you want to do a captive portal, that's pretty easy to do. Client isolation, there's various modes that you can have here, and they give you different explanations. Closed, you can communicate between your clients. It's just like a normal network, like a wired network. You can communicate. Radio is isolated. You can isolate devices from each other on that radio. And there's a couple different other options. You can read about them. For the DTIM period, for phones, if you want to save battery on your mobile devices, you can set this to 3 because it basically decreases the amount of communication between your phone or mobile device and the AP. There's some other features down here like scheduling, if you want to enable for certain periods of time. If you want to enable roaming and in between the different APs, the access points and stuff, there's some of these protocols here. Your devices have to support some of these features, otherwise it might cause problems. I think there's a note about that, and like Unify products usually have a note in there about make sure your devices support it. Most modern devices should support these things. You can limit bandwidth here, which is convenient. So if you see here, kilobits or megabits. So you can restrict this. This would be nice for a guest network, so they can't hog all your bandwidth, right? So you could really tune this up a little bit, and you can even say only certain times of the day make it certain bandwidth restrictions. So that's really cool. Device management basically shows which APs you want this SSID to be on. So if you have multiple APs, which I don't currently, you can just enable, select all of the devices so they're available on all of them. That's probably what most people would do for the home network. Then you got PPSK, where you can come in, and I already created a client here where you can give a specific password for specific users, and sometimes you can restrict access different ways. But as far as I can tell on this device, the main reason you might want to do this is you can restrict bandwidth for this IP or MAC address. I don't know if there's any other security features you can do with PPSK with this device. Depends on what the vendor wants to implement. Let's see, radio is your settings for if you want to do 5G, band steering, and client. Yeah, if you want to do client steering, airtime fairness. This is like radio settings, how wide you want your channel widths to be, and those kinds of settings that you'd want to tweak. This is how to really tweak your radio power, all the little settings of when you want it to switch over to different APs and that sort of thing. So you can see 5 gigahertz. If you want to enable wider channels, you can do that. You have to really play around with it and tweak these values if you want it to work like as efficient as possible. There are some options for meshing. You can mesh their APs. It limits how many SSIDs you can have to like 5 or 10 if you're on single band. But if you're on dual band, you can only do 5 SSIDs. It's still a good bit of SSIDs you can create, even with meshing. And if you are meshing, you can look at the topology. There's nothing going to be here right now because I'm not meshing. But that's a nice feature to have if you can't, for some reason, run a wire to a certain location. It's too difficult or time consuming or costly to do. You can just mesh some of these APs in certain locations. That might be the easiest way to get some networking in a different location. So those options there. You can block list, add some block lists for devices for SSIDs. If you click on here, you can, available devices, or you can add them manually. You can block stuff, which is nice. Switch management. You can see if I go to switch, you'll see my GWN7811P switch that they sent me. I had to update the firmware on this switch before I could even add it to this box, so they had a little bit older firmware. So you might have to do that with some of your devices. You might have to log in directly to the box, update the firmware, and then you can add it to the GCC6010 to manage it. So that's an option there. If you click on it, you can drill into it and see the port information. Similar to the box, the GCC6010, you can see the ports and what's available and what port profiles are being used, the rates and all that stuff, the speeds. And this has two 10 gig interfaces, you can see right here. So let's go to configuration. This is where you can set the radius information, multicast, voice VLAN. This is basically all the stuff. You can set the maximum frame size for jumbo frames that are allowed. And the various port profiles. And here you can create the port profiles. I think you can get to it from the other section we saw in the networking section possibly, or somewhere else on the GCC. I think it also shows these same port profiles. Let's go to clients. You see all the clients on your network here, whether it's wired or wireless. Like this one was one of my wireless devices on a 5 gigahertz network. So you can export a list here if you need to. So pretty nice to be able to see everything is connected to your network. Captive portal, you got policies you can create for the captive portal. If you go to add, you can see a bunch of different settings here you can put daily limits, a splash page, if you want internal, external splash page. and HTTPS redirection options. There's a bunch of little things in there you can set. The splash page, I thought this was pretty interesting. If you go to add, it has a nice little interface here to configure your splash page. So it looks, you make a nice little professional splash page. One thing I noticed that was interesting is you can pick Facebook and Twitter and Google. You can pick some other social media accounts to authenticate with. So I guess you could set up some, set up the APIs or whatever to hook into those social media services. And if you click this right here, it just adds a button on there, log on to Facebook. You can only have like 5 buttons or something like that because it grays it out after that. But if I uncheck Twitter and click Google, see it, then it grays it out again. So they don't want you picking like 10 things here, I guess. But so that's pretty cool. It's a nice little page there that you can create stuff. And then you got your guests and vouchers, nothing crazy here. You can add vouchers and guests. There's nothing to see here. All right, so now let's go to the firewall section up at the top. This is the part that I'm excited about to check out because it has some features here that are interesting. I'm not going to activate this firewall service enterprise subscription yet. You get 1 year free. I want to show you what's available without the subscription because there's still a lot of features available that you don't get. You just mainly don't get the IDS, IPS functionality, but you get a lot of other security control as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. You'll see this gives you a nice overview of the dashboard of like what's being blocked and protected on your network. So let's go through some of these settings here. This is the basic firewall settings in this firewall policy section. If you look at the rules policy, you have the 2 WAN interfaces, and then you got the default VLAN policy, and then I created a VLAN to show you what an example, I say an IoT VLAN. It just adds another entry in here, so all your VLANs should show up in here, and you can create separate policies for each one of these to block like inbound, outbound, or whatever. By default, any of the VLANs you add is going to be accept because it's your local network. You want to accept inbound traffic, and it's just the WAN interface which is dropped by default. So you probably just want to leave this as is, and then you can define rules elsewhere for your network. So what's interesting with Grandstream, they separate the inbound and forwarding rules. I'm thinking from an OPNsense perspective, or if you're a pfSense user, that these are kind of usually both in the same, set of interface rules that you would see in on those products. So for the inbound rules, here are all the default ones that are added for the WAN interfaces, and most of these seem like they're just like for the network services. That's probably where you want to use for the inbound rules for any services you want to allow coming into the network interfaces, such as DHCP, ping, IGMP, and those sorts of things. Notice for IPv6, you need to allow ICMP on the WAN interface, that's why I do that in my guides, because that's just how IPv6 works. It expects that to be enabled on the WAN interface. Notice the only one that applies to the internal network is the anti-lockout rule. OPNsense has something similar, so I guess so it doesn't block access to this interface, this web interface of this device, and it's on the default VLAN. That's where this is managed from. The forwarding rules are where it says if you want to forward between different groups of your source and destination within your firewall, all your VLANs and those sorts of things. This is part where you want to put most of your rules. And if you go to click add, you can see the settings here that are available. You can pick the source group. So you see the WAN, LAN, WAN, and then the default VLAN, which is basically a LAN interface. And then you have IoT, where I created a VLAN. So you can say, what you want your source to be and your destination. You can put your source IP, destination group, those sorts of things. It looks like you have to pick a source group. This is kind of like the interface you're picking, like from OPNsense perspective. And then you got the source IPs, but notice you don't have to put anything in there. So I'm assuming if you leave it blank, it's going to be any for source ports. So you could say anything that's coming from the IoT interface or the VLAN, and you can set your destination group. It's interesting, it's a little bit different than how you do it in OPNsense, because you have to pick like a destination interface that you want. Let's say you want something from IoT to access your default VLAN, which you probably most likely don't want to do that if it's your management VLAN, but I was just using this example. You can put your destination IP and port in here. So this is pretty similar. You got the accept and I drop. Advanced NAT allows you to do source and destination NAT rules here. You may only want this if you want certain IP addresses to be translated to other IP addresses from the source or destination. You might be able to use this for redirect rules, like I've created an OPNsense for DNS possibly. I haven't really played around with that too much. You know, the way the terminology is different, but you can do similar types of things in OPNsense with outbound net and other various settings like that. So you got the global configuration. This is interesting. Here is you got flush connection reload. This is if you want the firewall rules to take effect immediately when you add them, you can have it flush the connections, but that's, you know, a disruptive action, because if something is currently open, it's going to disconnect it. So you want this if you want it to apply immediately, but you know, for a home network, it's probably the consequences aren't very severe, but for, you know, a business network, you probably want to be careful and load it, you know, enabling that option. All right, so now let's go beyond the normal firewall rules, and we'll see what else we got here. We got security defense settings here for denial of service. If you enable this, you'll see a bunch of denial of service options here that you can pick. You know, TCP, SYN flood attack, UDP flood, ICMP flood. There's all these kind of flooding attacks, and then port scan detections. You can, you know, block IP options. There's all kinds of stuff here you can block. You can monitor this stuff first if you don't want to block anything yet, and then you can decide if you want to click that, if you want to block. So it's pretty interesting there. You can go to IP exception if you want to exclude anything from that denial of service. And then spoofing defense. I think this is for, is this ARP? Yeah. So this is to prevent ARP spoofing, I believe. Yeah. So you can block replies with inconsistent source and destination MAC addresses. This might be very useful because another device on your network could potentially spoof their MAC address there, you know, and pretend to be that device. So those are probably not bad things to enable on a home network. But you could argue if something's on your network trying to do that, you probably already have bigger problems. But it's good to see these settings here. I like that, to have all those options. Anti-malware. This one says to detect HTTPS URLs, you need to enable SSL proxy. So this device supports, I'm assuming, full SSL, TLS type inspection. That requires you to put certificates on your devices to be able to open up the packets and inspect what's in it, and then, you know, pass them along. So this one's a little more intrusive, and some people debate that kind of breaks the whole security aspect of the whole purpose of having SSL and TLS. But I can see with the corporate network and stuff, wanting to have more control over your network, you can enable this for your network as well if you want to have anti-malware. But you know, you can, you know, do deep packet inspection depth there and scan the files in there to try to detect malware. And this doesn't say it requires the subscription. I'm not sure if like some of these things require the enterprise subscription. It just doesn't say it on the screen. Let's go to intrusion prevention. This one, IDS IPS, this one I'm pretty sure requires enterprise license to use, but you can do notify, and if I block, no action. And you can put, you know, select your WAN interfaces you want to protect and the security level. So there's those settings there. IP exceptions for the IDS IPS checking. Then you got botnets. But so you can do some botnet detection here, which is nice to have in addition to IDS IPS. So you can see the signature library for the intrusion prevention is different than the malware signature. So it has its own separate one. So let's go to content control. You can do DNS filtering. If you click add, let's see what we got here. So you can put a name in, and you can just do a simple match on the DNS domain name. These are just like one-off DNS domain names. It looks like you can put in here. Not sure if you can. It doesn't look like you can upload a list there, but maybe somewhere you can. All right, so for the web filtering options, it says this also requires, you know, SSL proxy for HTTPS URLs because it can't inspect what's in it to be able to do this. So there's URL filtering you can do. You can block certain URLs. So if you want to do that, you can put it in here. It's very similar to the domain filtering that we just did, DNS filtering, and then URL category filtering. So it says web filtering is disabled, but look at all these categories you can block or allow. That's nice. And then you got keyword filtering. Pretty wild to be able to block on keywords. I feel like that would block a lot of content if you're not careful with what keywords you're using. So you can block by that. And then you got URL signature library. It's also updated periodically, just like the intrusion detection and anti-malware. All right, so then we go to application filtering. So you can do application level filtering. You can do some AI recognition on this as well. I think this one might have been already enabled where I did the track when I was showing the statistics, it enabled that same feature on this application filtering because I'm already using it to do deep packet inspection, I suppose, because I don't remember saving it on this part of the interface. And so you can do application filtering option there, you can enable, and then you can pick these categories here as well. This doesn't say you need to have an SSL proxy because this is maybe using the protocol itself that it detects maybe to know like what app you're potentially using. So you can override some filters, and it has its own signature library just like everything else. So all these 3 or 4 things here have their own signature libraries. So all right, so this SSL proxy, if you come down here, go to basic settings, this is where you can enable it, and then you can put your certificates in here that you need to create your own. And source address, you can put in some sources in here, and then you can do SSL proxy exemption list. That's pretty interesting there. They have a default category in there for finance. So you can rename that. So I wonder if they left that in there. This is an example for some reason. And then you got the security log page, and this tells you the various activities that's being detected by your firewall. So you can, as you can tell from all this, there's a lot of features available here. I'm going to go back up to the top real quick, and I'm going to click activation. Let's see what happens here. Oh, so now we got an enterprise license that's been activated. So you can see that this is the date that it's good for 1 year. And I'm really interested in knowing what this is going to cost. Like when I asked Grandstream, it did not tell me like what their prices are going to be, because I think they're still figuring that out, because that's how new this device is. They don't even have a pricing model set up yet. Yeah, so if I click on it, it tells you all the features that are available here. And yeah, it says you get 1 year free trial, and you can access and utilize all of the firewall updates issued by Grandstream. After, you'll need to purchase a firewall service plan to continue receiving updates by Grandstream. I don't know. I'm assuming all the features which have the signatures probably will require the subscription. One thing I wanted to mention is, even though I'm managing my network switch from the GCC6010, I can still log into the switch directly to its web interface and manage some settings that might not be available on the other web interface and the consolidated convergence solution. So it's good to know, because you might want to tweak some settings in here potentially that you can't get to from the other page. Like for example, if you go to the routing section, this is a layer 3 switch. You'll see the menu options for routing tables, static routes, OSPF, and there's 2 different versions of that. So if I click on routing table, you can see the routing table we have here, and then the static routes and OSPF. So there's some different settings in here that you might not be able to get to from the other interfaces. So there's a lot of features in here that are available. So I'm not going to step through all of these in this video, but before you manage to switch with the GCC6010, you might want to go to the maintenance and then do your firmware updates here on the upgrade, so that you can get to the latest version, because sometimes, like with this switch I mentioned earlier, I couldn't even add it to the GCC to manage it unless I had a newer firmware version, because that controller that's on that GCC6010 it's a newer device. So I guess it doesn't support all of their devices yet until they update their firmwares for some of these devices. So you might want to go and update that. I also did that with my wireless access point as well. I want to jump over. This is the web interface for the wireless access point. You can see pretty much similar features to what you could see on the GCC, except they're kind of maybe more spread out or condensed, because some of these settings are not necessarily available directly from that interface. But I came in here and did maintenance is under system instead of under maintenance, like the network switch, and I was able to come in here and paste in this firmware server URL from their Grandstream's website. You can go and get the latest version. You have to paste in the version and then click upgrade. I also changed it to HTTPS and hit save first before I did upgrade, because it didn't work until I hit save first. I think I had to do that before it would pick up these changes, which is a little bit confusing. So now that I have this, I can factory reset this, and then I can add it back to my GCC to manage it from there. Because I think once this AP is managed by the GCC device, I can't manage it directly from the web interface, unlike the network switch. So you have to do all the configuration on there, because whenever you go to log in here, it says it's paired already by another device. So I hope you enjoyed this video, checking out some of these Grandstream products, especially this GCC6010, which I think is interesting if you want a next generation firewall. Depending on the licensing cost, you may or may not want this for your home network. I have to find out what that's going to be at some point in the future when they know what that is. But I will be featuring this in a full network build at some point. I'll probably use this device as in one case, and then I'll do a OPNsense build with a mini PC or whatever using this same Grandstream equipment. So just to give you some different examples of how you can set your network up different ways, because everybody has different needs and they want to build their networks out differently. That's a great thing about building a home network. You can build it how you want, right? I can't tell you how to build your network. I can just show you examples of how you might want to build your network. And then you can take that and tweak it and make it your own. That's what I enjoy about home labs in general, home labbing and home networking. You can just build things out as you go. I build things out as I have different needs that come up over time as I'm growing my network and my knowledge and skills and various other things. And I have things that I want to do and just accomplish over time. Just it's fun to learn and it's fun to tinker. And I hope you also enjoy that and have a passion for it as well. If you're watching this video, you might have some interest or passion in it. I'm hoping that I can help spur you along to give you some ideas. And I hope you guys can spur me along for some ideas as well, because I like to continually learn as well. So I can learn from you and you can hopefully learn from me. And we can go on this journey and this adventure together, right? And so this will be a good time for everybody that likes to do these kinds of things. So until next time, I'll see you guys later.